Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you've enjoyed your break. As I said to you when we went for the break, we're having a really interesting discussion here with Mark Burns-Williamson, who's the Police and Crime Commissioner for West Yorkshire, a man who has enormous responsibility on his shoulders. The responsibility is to try and keep our communities safe. I mean, we could have a discussion on a number of issues here, but for tonight we're just going to limit it around his role as a Police and Crime Commissioner, how he provides safety and security and well-being to the citizens of West Yorkshire, particularly the Muslim community, who recently has been the victim of an enormous rise in hate crime. We've seen huge spikes across the whole of the nation when we've seen issues around terrorism, when we've had terrorist attacks on our shores, like Westminster, etc., Manchester, and we've seen people living in fear for a number of days and weeks. And also when we had the Punish a Muslim Day, and we had the most senior police officer, Paul Gianassi, here the day before the Punish a Muslim Day happened, and I worked very closely with him to reassure the Muslim communities when letters went out. And I know you worked as well. Yeah. That was atrocious attempt to try and engender hate between communities. Now these sort of issues keep challenging us all the time, and I know you've appointed two people in the police service as ambassadors, for positive action. Yeah. Now positive action can mean different things to different people. Now for some people positive action means taking people from your existing pool of people, giving them extra tuition, for example, or extra support to bring them up to a level so they can move up within the organization. Or it can mean bringing people from outside into the organization who may not necessarily meet the basic criteria, and giving them the chance to do something within the organization so they can then move up in the organization. I mean, in your team specifically, as the PCC's office, how big is that team?
We have a core staff of around about 20 people at my office, which is not big in the great scheme of things. And in fact, it's less than what we had under the old police authority system. But of course, we have to make sure we work with and try and ensure that the views and opportunities are available for all sections of people who live and work in West Yorkshire.
And I mean, in terms of diversity, how diverse is your team? Do you have people from with a disability, for example, working there, black and minority ethnic community, etc.? So are you happy with the diversity of the team that you have at the moment? Because one of the things I learned when I was working in the public sector was that people from diverse communities who come in, they bring an added value to it because of their personal experiences. That helps the organization shape itself better in terms of service outputs. So I mean, I'm sure you probably believe that as well. And have you had any problems in recruiting people, or people are not applying to you? Have you had many vacancies that people can apply for?
Yeah, I mean, we have had some vacancies actually, and
because sometimes turnover is not there.
Yeah, and exactly. But we have gone out to recruitment very recently actually. So I'm in the process of appointing a BAME advisor, Black and Minority Ethnic advisor, to build on the champions, the victims champions role that we've had in place. But because of the way some of my funding comes into the office through the MOJ and the Home Office, we have to go through a commissioning process with some of the roles. But yes, I do employ people with disabilities and some of the other gender strands as well.
Right. Yeah, because that is important. I mean, obviously, when people see an organisation and an institution, and if they see it one-dimensional, like local authorities used to be. I mean, Wakefield used to be in those days purely mainly white, middle-class, middle-aged men, in senior positions. Until when you came the councillor, I mean, things started to change afterwards. But before that, it was primarily run by men who were middle class, middle aged, and all white, basically. And then things started to change when you arrived. So I mean, if they see change in the police service itself and the PCC, people have more confidence. So I mean, this positive action initiative you've taken, what is that for? What is it expected to do?
Well, it's really aimed at trying to increase the diversity within the police force and service itself, because, you know, we've talked about my office, 20 staff or so, but West Yorkshire Police is a big organisation,
Yeah.
roughly 4,500 people at the moment, staff and officers, and you know, clearly we need to try and ensure that the wider service reflects the best it can the communities that we have in West Yorkshire. And I think the BAME population in West Yorkshire is about 18%, or it was at the last census. It might have increased. Now, we have been doing a lot of work, not only with the appointment of these positive action coordinators and ambassadors, but we have been going around various organisations, including some of the universities and colleges, to try and encourage people to apply from those backgrounds and offer support to individuals that may need a bit of extra support around some of the application processes, because we know that the rate of applications don't always convert into full-time employment, and clearly we are making steady progress, but not quickly enough.
How do you then negate the accusation that you're dumbing down the criteria for, you know, other groups, and therefore you're providing a second-class service to the citizens of West Yorkshire, because the level of recruits that you're getting, you know, then they don't meet the normal set criteria? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've spoken to Dee Collins, the Chief Constable, about, and it is important that the standards clearly are kept at the level that's required. So our approach has been around providing support to people in our different communities, if they're interested in applying, and then secondly, we have some mentors within the service, and the role of these ambassadors is clearly part of that as well, to actually try and get over any issues or barriers that they may perceive in applying to work for West Yorkshire Police.
Right. I mean, I'm sure our viewers will remember Dee Collins, who was the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire. She came on one of my programmes. We talked about the role of the police service as it's changing, and one of the things she focused was she wanted to see more people from the black minority ethnic community join the police service. She feels that this police service has changed over the last 15-20 years, and therefore, you know, the need to provide a service which meets the needs of the community as it grows can best be met by having more diversity within the police service itself of officers. So, you know, we agree that, and I'm hoping that Dee will come back one day and we can talk more about how they go about on the recruitment on that side. I mean,
and sorry, but what I would also add as well is that recently West Yorkshire Police has been identified as within the top 50 most inclusive employers, and that clearly that goes to things like disability, people with disabilities working in the service, LGBTQ, clearly people from BAME backgrounds as well. But we know there's more to do.
I mean, one of the issues that was challenging to the police service in the past, for example, and I'm sure it still remains an issue in the police service itself, is that you may have recruitment, but then you have a problem of retention. You know, that people leave fairly quickly in some cases, and then there's an issue around progression as well. I mean, I sat on a government advisory body for a number of years around recruitment, retention, progression, and that was a challenge that faced all police services.
Yeah.
How good or bad is it in West Yorkshire? I mean, people come into the organisation, and I did many years ago, long before your time, when I was an advisor to the West Yorkshire Police Authority, I was asked to do a review of the police service and racism. And the report that I produced, the Chief Constable, Mr. Gregory, he was in those days, Ronald Gregory,
yes,
refused to publish the report because it was extremely critical of West Yorkshire Police. I found enormous evidence of racism within the police force. And a lot of people are leaving the police service after having been joined the police service because they were facing racism from their colleagues and they could not take it anymore. Now, obviously things must have changed.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you tackling if this is still within the service itself, working in partnership with D, this issues about racism, sexism within the police service. Are those issues still relevant? Are they still prevalent? And, are you still having to tackle those issues?
Well, of course they're still relevant, because if there are any cases of that, then they are taken very seriously, and obviously there are disciplinary processes, complaints processes within the police. So thankfully things have changed an awful lot. I've seen that change as well over many years being involved with the police. But again, we can't be complacent about these things. But I think there's much more inclusiveness now within the service. Not only evidence to that the fact that West Yorkshire Police has been referenced in that top 50 employers, but we carry out regular staff surveys.
Right.
And we've worked with Durham University actually most recently, and I think it's Professor Graham who was one of the people that oversaw that, said he felt from where we were a few years ago, it was a remarkable turnaround in some of the feedback we were receiving. So
the people working in the force are much more comfortable, much more happy working in the organisation. I mean, let me turn this around a little bit. I mean, you've been in Bradford today, you've been going around your neighbourhood policing teams. I mean, if you walk the streets of Bradford, particularly where the Asian community are concentrated, where there's enormous social deprivation, there's tremendous lack of opportunities for young people.
And I do often go around.
And I'm
those
sure
areas.
you do.
Yeah.
I mean, when I go out there and talk to people, one of the things I find is that there is not a lot of confidence in the police service. So, for example, if somebody is a victim of a hate crime, a woman walking down the street wearing a hijab, her hijab is pulled, spat at, sworn at, may be, and you ask them, why have you reported it? They say no. One of the reasons is that people feel that the police will do nothing. There's a lack of confidence and trust, between the police. And this is nothing new.
Yep.
I mean, the Lawrence inquiry, Macpherson identified this very clearly.
Yep.
That there was a huge lack of trust and confidence between the communities and the police service. And that lack of confidence at the moment, with the amount of hate crime we've seen against Muslims, is that that gap is getting wider instead of getting narrower. Although the police crime service sometimes shows us something different. How are you, what action, what initiatives are you looking to take? I know you talked about community engagement, and I know the HMIC report says that West Yorkshire is one of the better forces when it comes to community engagement. But despite this engagement, you get this feeling that there's still this lack of, connectivity between communities and the police service. What additional work, action you think you need to take to try and bridge that gap of confidence between the communities and the police service?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that the confidence levels in policing are still relatively high compared to some other services. But having said that, I accept that when there are major things happening, not just here in West Yorkshire but around the country, that are on TV or on social media, I think all these are big influences on people's perceptions about the police and potentially other services as well. So I think we constantly have to work hard to try and reassure communities here in Bradford and throughout West Yorkshire that if they report a hate crime, in this case, that it is going to be taken seriously, and messages from me and the Chief Constable and the wider service need to be constantly raising this, that if you report these things, it will be taken seriously. And one of the reassuring things is that when people have reported these crimes and the police have investigated and dealt with it, the confidence levels actually go up in terms of the police contact.
Yeah, I agree with that. As a victim of a hate crime, whoever you may be, whether it's race, disability, gender, or any crime, the confidence level is dependent on the outcome of the justice system. So a lot of the people out there, the ordinary person in the street, doesn't realize that the criminal justice system is three components. They think if I go to the police will get the culprit and I'll get justice at the end of the day. What they don't realize is that you have the police doing their bit, They then pass the file on the CPS. The CPS, with the Crown Prosecution Service, will look at the file, look at the evidence, and say, okay, yes, we've got sufficient evidence to prosecute. Then the case goes to the court, and then your magistrates will then sit down and listen to the case, and then maybe slap somebody on the wrist and say, go away, don't do it again. And that is more damaging. So when that process navigates, people navigate through that process, and they see at the end of the day that they've not received justice, what role do you think the police should play to try and help that individual who's the victim of hate crime to understand, what you have done? Because you would have done your duty. You would have done it through diligence. You would have gathered the evidence, and you would have done your bit. It's the other end that's letting people down. So how do you then navigate through that barrier of, that lack of confidence that people then have? Yeah,
you're right, and let's be honest, it is a very traditional way of looking at how we've dealt with crime over many years. And yes, we do have the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, who consider the evidence and the file that the police submit, and then the court process in terms of determining what the outcome is. But actually, I think around a lot of these incidents, there is good evidence to say that people don't necessarily think that it is going to result in a conviction at court. And there are different ways of dealing these things around. Clearly, it depends on the severity of whatever the incident is. But actually, in some cases, people just want the person that's been abusing somebody on a bus or a train or somewhere in public to be spoken with and pointed out the distress and the harm that they are causing, and explain to them that their actions are not acceptable. Now, in quite a lot of cases, that sometimes is enough.
Right.
But in others, clearly, if people carry on with that behaviour, then it does need to find its way into the criminal justice system. So I don't think we should necessarily always look at this as it's somehow got to end up at court, when actually
in prison,
there are different community outcomes, shall we say, of restorative justice.
I was just going to come to that, yes.
Yeah.
Are you working on restorative justice? Because I know that, in the work that I do on a national basis, that there is some, evidence now developing that a lot of people will be happy with restorative justice. For those viewers who don't know much about restorative justice, basically, when somebody commits a crime or an incident, instead of it going to court, what the police and the CPS maybe will do, will say, okay, let's, as Mark says, sometimes what the victim only wants is to say, go and talk to that individual, and I tell them to apologize, and if the apology is there, he's happy with it, or she's happy with it, and they don't want to take the matter any further. And also there's some evidence coming up, emerging now, that restorative justice has better outcomes for the victims than going through the whole of the CJS, criminal justice procedure. So that is good to hear that. But are we seeing more and more restorative justice cases, incidents taking place now in our parts of the world?
Yeah, and as it happens, I've just commissioned a new 3-year service with an organisation called Restorative Solutions around this very approach, and I'm pleased to say it's Bradford that's leading the way well within this. So this is where, it has to be appropriate to start with, so you need the consent of the victim.
Oh, definitely, yes.
To then talk to the perpetrator, to then look at what are the solutions, and it might be that it's a written apology. It could be that both parties agree to meet, for somebody to understand the distress that they've caused somebody else, whether that's through a race hate crime or a disability race hate crime. There are a number of options within there, which actually might ultimately result in a better outcome all round if the person who has committed the hate crime or incident changes their behaviour.
Yes, I agree.
And is educated.
I agree.
So that they understand.
I think that is something that people need to be aware of, that restorative justice is proving to be much more sort of positive for a lot of people, both the victims as well as the perpetrators. So it's something that I would certainly encourage. We're quickly running out of time, let me just turn to third-party report. I know you work with number of organisations, like you said, Stop Hate UK, but there are other organisations like Tell Mama and Mend, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Mend is one of the organisations you work with in West Yorkshire. How strong are your relationships and links with Mend in particular? Tell Mama I worked with, and I was involved in setting that up. But do you have the same relationship with Mend as well, that where you pass on information to each other? Or are they just feeding in hate crimes incidents to you?
Yeah, like you say, we do some formal work with Tell Mama in terms of the hate crime agenda. I've actually spoken and engaged with Mend at a number of events.
All right.
The most recent one I think was at Bradford University through the Muslim Students' Union there.
Right.
And we do absolutely take on board their feedback in addressing what the concerns may be. But there are lots of other organisations as well that we engage with, and all forms of hate crime, whether it's against Muslims or BAME communities or people with disabilities or LGBT homophobic crime, we take them all equally seriously.
Obviously, I mean, the agenda is quite huge and quite wide. I mean, in this community, in this area, we have a very large Muslim population, so obviously we concentrated on anti-Muslim hate crime. I mean, that is something that is of real concern to our viewers, because they're mainly Muslim viewers, and something that we want to see some tackled in a way. I mean, we're running out of time, but hopefully you'll come back one day. I hope this experience of coming here today has not put you off. I'm sure Dee Collins is going to come back as well. I'd like to come to bring you back and sort of talk about, in more detail, about any specific initiatives about tackling anti-Muslim hate crime. But in terms of going back, training is one of the most important aspects. So the better trained the staff are, the better aware they are of the impacts of some of these incidents and crimes. How confident are you that you have the mechanisms in place? I know you're appointing a consultant. I saw the information. What do you expect this consultant to actually do? Well,
I mean, clearly that role from within my office is just one aspect of this. So obviously we're still interviewing at the moment, appointing to that role very shortly. But again, it builds on a lot of work we've already done. So it's not a new concept. It's just that we're having to recommission based on the funding.
I know it's developing contacts within the West Yorkshire geographical area.
Right. But actually, the ambassadors and the coordinators within the wider service have clearly got a big role to play as well. So ongoing training is absolutely something that has to be ongoing. And given that we are recruiting a lot of new police officers into the service, we ensure that their initial training as an aspect of this within that training, but then it needs refreshing constantly once they take up their full-time positions. So training and awareness is
absolutely vital. Ongoing training is absolutely vital. I agree with that. I mean, we're coming to the end of the program. I mean, the whole issue around policing in communities is absolutely important. One of the things that we have learned, and it was briefly touched on here today, is about reporting of incidents. There's a lot of reluctance to report incidents because people feel that the police will not do anything about it. They might not take it seriously. They might not believe the victim themselves. But can I urge you, if you feel that you've been a victim of hate crime, whether it's racist hate crime, homophobic hate crime, anti-Muslim hate crime, for God's sake, please report it, no matter how small you may think it is, because the more incidents that are reported, the more evidence we can gather about the extent of the hate crime that is taking place, and therefore people like Mark have more information at their hand to deal with it in a most effective way. I hope you've enjoyed this program. Thank you, Mark, for coming in. I've really learned quite a bit, and I've really had a wonderful opportunity to talk to you, and I hope you found it interesting as well. I'd like you to come back one day and we can continue with this conversation. Like I said, I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Let us know how you feel about this discussion we've had, and we inshallah will be coming back. And if you want something else that you want us to talk about with Mark in future, let me know, and inshallah I'll try and do that In the meantime, take care. Thank you very much for being with us. May Allah be with you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.